Hello, everyone. So I hope you've all had a glorious conference so far, and it's really, really nice to be here with you and kind of beaming live from the internets. So I know this is pretty far along in the program, so hopefully you find this really, really as engaging as we have, and we will. And hopefully as well, you have some great questions as you've been primed by the great conference so far. So today we're really going to be talking a lot about the intersection between AI and product. And I'm really, 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 really happy to be joined on this panel with Yerzat and Amir. Now, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but what you're looking at here is some of the greatest AI and product minds that I know, and people that have seen a lot of it and have a really good understanding of what it's going to take to bring it together. And a long time ago, I had a good chance to sit down with Yerzat, and we talked a little bit about the messy side of AI and product. And it's because Yerzat's been doing it long enough that it was definitely a lot messier than it is today, given that a lot of it was, we're getting lucky, we're figuring it out. So what we're going to hopefully get out of this conversation today is not only just a bit about their perspective, but maybe a couple of takeaways that you can go forward into your AI and product journey with, and hopefully increase the probability of your success of bringing an amazing product to market. So having that context behind us, I'd like to quickly introduce myself. My name is Beatty. I'm the head of DevOps transformation at Agile by Design, and I work primarily on the technical side of major software projects, but AI has been a passion of mine and something I've been working in since probably 2013, 2014. And I've always enjoyed this side of the AI problem. So while the modeling and the actual machine learning or deep learning or whatever you're applying is exciting and is really magical when it comes down to it, if you've built something amazing but it doesn't actually create any value, it's not reached its endpoint. So hopefully after this conversation, we're a little bit closer to understanding what it takes to get to that endpoint. So knowing that, I'd like to take an opportunity to allow our great panelists here to introduce themselves. So Yerzat, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Ashley. Hey guys, my name is Yerzat. So I've been in the AI ML DS space for 5 years now. Currently, I'm a technical program manager at Yelp in their applied machine learning group. My experiences vary. So I've been doing AI for B2B enterprises most of my career, for the mining and metal sector, for the insurance sector, mostly in startups. And I've been on the side of essentially like pitching, doing POCs, putting systems in production. And as Ashley mentioned, I've seen teams stumble and get lucky. But I guess as the industry matures, we see more and more kind of workflows and how to get it done properly. So that's my passion, product, project, and machine learning, data science. So that's my background kind of. And as Ashley mentioned, the messy side of it, I've seen it mostly all, but we're all learning, and I'm learning, so it's great. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much. And Amir, why don't you tell the lovely assembled audience about yourself?
Definitely. Thanks for having me. Excited to have this conversation. It's always fun to talk to the two of you about this topic. So as Ashley said, I'm Amir. I'm a quantum physicist by training, and a few years ago decided to change careers, move to industry and start working in AI. I worked at Royal Bank as a data scientist. Started several years ago, and then moved into management and didn't quite love it, so sort of pivoted my career towards product management. I built, mostly my team built an NLP product to analyze regulatory and compliance documents that was used by capital markets and internal audit and a few other teams inside Royal Bank. That product actually still exists, although I left a few years ago, and people are using it. So I'm quite happy about it. And along the way, I saw how easy it is to do it wrong, and how frequent it is that people get it wrong. So after that, I started my own company, my own startup, where really it made mission to educate and create a platform and a product that will enable people to think about it correctly, leverage the right knowledge that is needed to activate the theoretical knowledge of machine learning into industrial applications. And I'm happy to talk more about this today.
Exciting, very, very, very exciting. So why don't we just kind of plunge right in, and Yerzat, I'll start with you. I kind of teased the audience when I said, you know, about the messy side of AI products, but why don't you just kind of give us a little bit of information on why AI products are so messy?
Sure. Yeah. The first question goes to me. So, with software, let's start with software development. By itself is pretty complicated to deliver, right? One would argue. But then you also add the complexity of machine learning or data science into that context, and then things become much more complex than usual. I guess so. There's a lot of uncertainty in delivering AI products, especially if you're like in the beginning and the discovery phase, and you might not necessarily be able to ship features, at the end of every sprint. So it's a lot of experimentation. To that you add the usual context of project management and stakeholder management, client expectations, and then you get this kind of intersection of all of these different things, and you have some poor data scientists trying to figure out, what do we need to actually do, right? And then the clients overhyped, waiting for some black box magic to solve all of their problems, but their problems never go away. Like, data is not clean, infrastructure is not there, they don't have the in-house capabilities, they don't know what you're talking about half the time. They just want to see the ROI and the NPV. So you just add all that up, and it becomes really complicated. All of that to say, just any type of project, there's a high failure rate for any project. Then you add the complication of software plus the complication of AI, and then you get much higher failure rates if you don't do things a certain way, if you don't kind of apply like lessons learned from other people. So this is why it's quite messy on the inside usually. Yeah.
I really like how well you set up Amir for this next question. So you referenced high failure rates, and we see this all across. You're right. Any sector, no matter what you're doing, you're going to encounter a certain failure rate. AI, machine learning, they can be a little bit higher failure rates for some of the reasons you described. But Amir, you said something to the effect of how easy it is to get it wrong. So let's hear from your perspective. What's contributing to the high failure rate?
Yeah, definitely. So it is easy for a lot of people who know software to think they know how to manage AI-based projects, and I think that's okay. There are really two components to what I just said. So one part is, for AI people, it is very easy to think that what they're doing is so different than software development, to the point that they're strongly resistant to even adopting tried and true, frameworks and processes. And on the other hand, for software people, people who've been building software for a very, very long time, it's so easy to think that I've been doing this for a while. AI is not more than software, so I know how to do it. And both sides are wrong to a large extent, right? So AI people can learn so much from established and tried and true processes, Scrum type of processes, Agile, etc. Of course, it's not going to be, just copy paste and it will work. You have to adapt it, but there are so many valuable pieces that can still adapt. And on the other side, what a lot of software people underestimate completely is the uncertainty and the experimental nature of doing AI projects, which makes it really, really complex when dealing with the stakeholders. Like, a lot of the time, the stakeholders expect, I need this feature on this date, what you need to do is I have to run a bunch of experiments and see what I get, even before I'm able to, commit to a date. So navigating, first of all, like bringing these two sort of points of view together is extremely complex. And, at first I was surprised how much people were getting it wrong. But at this point, I can see why they're getting it wrong, because everybody's coming with a certain amount of bias towards the problem, given their prior experiences. And, as we sort of mentioned implicitly and explicitly, it's largely a maturity thing. So as we try these things and fail and hopefully learn, eventually, we get to a point where we understand how these things should be done properly. And, obviously, this topic is about product development, and there's so much that people have tried over the past 2 decades in, the modern ways of product development, that if done properly for AI projects, it can make a huge difference. And that's really, what we're hoping to talk about today.
I love it. I love it very, very much. And I feel like something that Yerzat kind of stimulated in a previous conversation that we've had, I think is worth sharing here. So Yerzat, like you'd heard from Amir, there's like the software people, and then there are the AI people, and each suffer from their own understanding of what the problem is going to be. And therefore, what you end up with is some kind of a handoff in a lot of these cases of specifications or just an understanding of the problem. But I'm wondering if you could shed the light on, what if we had full stack AI people that could actually do the whole thing, or full stack software development that could actually do the whole thing, such that this handoff is, I don't know, mitigated somewhat. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that side of things.
Right. Great question, Ashley. So essentially, this is a problem, I guess, of a data science unicorn, right? Everybody wants this person that can do, R&D, experimentation, POCs, and all the way, to putting a system in production and setting up ML ops, and then, and following ML engineering best practices and things like that. But I guess this also, there's a known answer to this in terms of organizational setups, right? It depends on what you're trying to optimize for in terms of your org design, right? Obviously, if you're going to be growing these unicorns within your team, then everybody's, universal and capable and can do everything. It's great. But at some point, if you're in let's say a small company, right, or in a company that doesn't have enough exciting things for people to do this, at some point they'll leave, right? And at the same time, you don't most likely have enough time to ramp up enough of these unicorns. So what we see, I guess, happen right now is there's specialization, right, within teams and then within orgs. As the field is maturing, you see ML engineering, DS, applied data science, applied research, model research being kind of more siloed and being more specialized, which is great. But then, it falls on the managers, on the people who create the org system, to make sure like these handoffs are minimized, or there's clear, interfaces between, a model that's developed for POC and then handed off to be developed, for production. So there's that kind of interesting trade-off, right, between trying to grow unicorns, but then having to let them go to the big techs, versus kind of doing like a factory style kind of, cross-collaborative team that is strong in each of their own suits. But, alignment is key. Like everybody needs to understand that they're on the same team. Everybody needs to share the same vision, and like it goes back to strong product principles as well, right? It is on the product managers most of the time to make sure like they're the glue, right? To make sure like the handoffs are minimized and things are not lost in between, which is very hard to do. And you have to think which context you're in, right? Obviously, if you're doing an MVP, trying to figure out product market fit, you don't want to have a factory because that will just churn out stuff that's not usable. But if you have figured it out, you just need to scale and execute, then yeah, probably just go for this specialized type handoffs between roles, because that's more manageable too. down the line.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that the scale of the problem you're trying to solve will also inform this in a way, because at a certain point, the system will reach a level of complexity that even a unicorn, it's kind of exceeded their complexity threshold to be able to reason about it and kind of keep it on track in a way. And you almost need to separate it, which I think illustrates what you're talking about, which is like a progression of maturity in your product development flow, where it's like I'm figuring it out, I've got it, I'm really scaling it. And I think this is a pretty good chance to kind of send it over to you, Amir, to talk about this intersection between AI and product, and what one of these great setups or systems of AI product development would look like. Because I think you've done some work in this field that is definitely worth sharing with the wider audience here.
Yeah, definitely. So just sort of to create a segue from the previous question, I think, and give it a bit of historical lens, compared to add on to what Yerzat said. I think if you think about AI a few years ago, it was still a fairly untested kind of function in a lot of companies. So in a lot of cases, like 5-6 years ago when I started my career in AI, if you look at a lot of teams then, they were isolated teams who were kind of sitting in a corner trying things out, and when it gets somewhere, they just throw it over the wall to somebody else, etc. And that was a very, very clear signal that the executives had heard that this is a cool thing that cool people are doing and wanted to test it out, but they didn't have the confidence to put in more effort and resources into it. But fast forward 5 years, now that confidence is there, like people have seen that those lucky successes is giving people the confidence to start thinking about AI in a more grand way. Think about it as, okay, we want to build a product that has AI in it to solve a specific problem. So what kind of team roles do we need? What kind of processes do we need? So we start to get into those multifunctional teams, like executives are starting to understand the value of what Yerzat is talking about. And I think that's sort of the mental shift that we needed to go through over the years. But I guess I'll share my screen very quickly to this framework in a little more detail. Very quickly, and then we can continue the conversation. Can I ask to share the switch the screen? And
yep, we can see it.
Okay, so awesome. This is a sort of a document that three of us have put together. You can check it out. If the organizer don't mind, please put the link to this document in the chat so that people can play with it. But there are a bunch of videos that you can watch and interact with it, but I'm going to focus on this part specifically. So really, when you think about product development in general, it is all about validation along the way. So you start from product discovery, which is the process of understanding what problem you're trying to solve, how are you going to solve it, and how is AI even going to be part of your solution. Then you move on to a short-term, validation, where the purpose is really around, can I build something very simple, what we usually call prototypes that solve that problem quickly, and then eventually into a long-term validation where we start moving things into production and start using it in the wild and see where it fails and where it works. And in my opinion, a lot of the interesting things happen in this long-term validation point because it is actually, hitting the road. Users are interacting with it. It is failing in some cases. We can actually start to look at why is it failing and how we can make it better. But a lot of what we've been doing in the past few years for a lot of teams have been, stuck in this step of discovery and at most prototyping, which is sort of the short-term validation and never really making it here. And when we talk about failure, that's really not having this kind of insight that you have to discover a problem worth solving. You have to come up with some way of quickly validating that your solution is, valuable and plausible. But the most important piece is this one, like, can you operationalize it? Can you actually put it in the hands of people? And importantly, this validation never stops. Like, can you monitor the models in production and see where it fails, in what use cases does it fail, and how to learn from those and go forward. And there are a lot of other interesting things that will happen that we can go into more details about each of these in a minute. But I'm going to stop here so that I don't run for too long.
I got to say, I think it's an amazing view on this, because I can remember back in like 2015, Amir, you were there, like there was like the AI in Toronto meetup kind of thing. And I can remember that it just seemed like we were, and I think that there was a bit of extra magic in it, because like this was at least my first experience with seeing deep learning and seeing like some pretty awesome stuff actually work. So I was like, wow, that was incredible. But I recognized that I was getting, and I think that what we've realized over the last 5 or 6 years since that point is that we can take luck out of the equation. The luck will always be part of it, but we can diminish the, call it, the downside of luck by doing this validation process you're talking about. So not only, yes, finding the right problem, but doing as much short-term validation as possible, and then, or sorry, short time horizon validation, then the longer time horizon validation, just because it kind of sucks to build an entire product and not have a customer. It kind of is wrong that like AI in product is messy. I think to go back to what you were saying earlier, is that because it's expensive, it's really hard, it's very iterative, it's very experimental. It requires a new approach to how we deliver value in this way, which makes it very important to take the luck out of it as fast as possible. And thank you for that contribution. And I can see that the link was posted into the chat. So I'm hoping that that people are able to kind of get that information and apply it as valuably, as they can. Now, I guess more of an open-ended question. What are the remaining challenges? Let's just pretend that we could wave a magic wand and we took this risk part out of it, or we minimized it to the point where it was the same as building any web application. What will be the remaining challenges? And we don't need to get into much depth, but for the wider audience assembled here, like, what would be the next landmine that you'd be concerned about? And I'll either of you can jump in and answer this one.
Amir, go ahead. This for a second.
If I may share the screen again and show a little more detail, because I think this would be pretty helpful in that conversation. So previously, what I said was that you have to go through these steps of discovery, short-term validation and long-term validation. And obviously, for discovery, you're doing things like user research. You're trying to understand, what do users actually want, who are the end users, and how they can use it. And in short term, as we said, you're designing a product and you're prototyping it to make sure that it works. But really, once you do these two steps, you are in a stage that Ashley just mentioned, which is you validated that there is a problem, you validated that sort of a solution for it, and you're ready to take it further. And the next step really gets into very interesting topics like MLOps. So how do you operationalize machine learning? And how do you operationalize it in a way that is fairly integrated with the development step, right? Like very similar to DevOps, and the reason that we do DevOps. As I said, the very important thing in that step is you want to make sure that when you build something, you're very, very ready to monitor it, learn from it, and very quickly update it. And if you're not ready, if you're not set up to do that, you can't really make it better, because good products don't fall out of the sky. You just iterate and iterate and iterate until they become better. So, and this MLOps is a huge step in that. How are you delivering this product to the user is extremely important. Like, is it a user interface? Is it a set of APIs? Is it a mobile app, et cetera, et cetera? And really thinking about the user experience that this machine learning product is going to provide to the user is extremely important. And it is amazing how many products fail because the delivery is not done right. Like, it is doing amazing things in the back end, but the user can't really understand what is happening when they're trying to interface with it. And of course, there are many other components around it, like, how is this going to be funded? How is this going to be packaged and maintained for long term? And many other aspects that you have to think about, because the machine learning is a small component in a much larger software product in most cases. And how is this going to integrate into the system from a technical point of view, but also into the user's workflow? Like, is it a business workflow that it has to integrate into? Is it some sort of a user purchasing behavior thing on a website that this needs to integrate into? So thinking about all of these details of bringing that machine learning model that you build and put into production into life become extremely important.
Great, very good. Yerzat, did you want to expand on that? Or did he cover it? Actually, go.
I think Amir touched on a lot of good points. I think the overarching theme that we're talking about here is, the notion of like machine learning engineering, right? So can this area as a discipline, just like software, like from the 70s to like the 90s, right, have a set of best practices and just kind of this body of knowledge, and then be kind of formalized into an engineering discipline, right, with like, to make sure it's more predictable and stable. I think within that, like some of the exciting areas that would be cool to see, like, testing ML models before, before putting them into, out there, and then finding edge cases through like, essentially scale would be great. So if we could have more robust testing, and this ties back to probably explainability and interpretability of all of these models, right? Because that's really important, especially if you're dealing in a like a B2B or B2C kind of relationship, right? You really want to make sure, especially in the enterprise, when you're selling like multi-million-dollar deals, they want to know what exactly is going to happen to your model, right? Then I guess we used to get away with stuff like, 98% of the time it's going to work, and then the 2% we're just going to write off as a loss. But I think more and more people are jumping on the bandwagon, would want to see like more concrete answers there. I also think data, right? I like the shift to the data, right? The focus away from models to data, because a lot of people or enterprise companies don't have clean data. They don't have the big data. They, zero-shot learning, things like that. Like, how do we actually, use transfer learning or use small-scale data sets, right? And this is just a very interesting conversation to have. But I guess it ties back to, again, ML is engineering as a practice, where essentially, it would be great to see like, okay, you go into an ML engagement, and then you're able to essentially scope it out and cost it out, with a high degree of predictability, with a low sort of, with a very high confidence interval that this project is going to cost this much based on like these parameters that you're giving me, right? And then, compute is a big problem too, hardware and things like that. So there's lots of exciting stuff. But I think the overall thread is the field getting more mature and putting in better engineering practices around it. Yeah.
It definitely will be interesting to see what the unit testing of a AI model actually looks like, or that I'm using the term very loosely, but it would be very interesting to see how that side of things matures. Even though most developers don't want to write tests and then write code, it'll be weird to see what we're talking about a little while from now when it comes to testing these things. Because I know Yerzat, a long time ago we had talked about the institutional expectations of AI companies have developed, and like you're saying, require a certain amount of availability. You're going to have SLIs, you're going to have SLOs, you're going to have to produce a reliable product. And while that you probably could have gotten away with, as you're saying a little while ago, now you need a support model. Now you need somebody who can diagnose what's wrong with this thing at 4 a.m. and fix it. Like that's not going to be easy for a lot of smaller teams. And therefore establishing the discipline around this engineering part up front is more likely to result in more reliability long-term for pretty much any of these AI products. So I can see that we're pretty much at time, but I'm just going to kind of stop for a second and see if there are any questions in the chat or from the audience that you would like us to chat through before we kind of wrap it up. So while those are coming online, what I'll do is I'll ask you, nice open-ended questions so far. No questions so far. Good. Okay, a nice open-ended question. So last question for both of you. When was the last time that you were truly amazed by AI?
I'll take a stab at that. So being a physicist, I'm very interested in seeing how AI is being used in science in general. Because for the longest time, really, a lot of the computer science disciplines were fairly separate from the other types of science. And we do develop software to analyze our data and take data, et cetera, in science. But now AI is being used as one of the tools in the tool set of scientists. And one of the most interesting examples that came out, beyond the usual, LHC and particle physics and et cetera, that has been using AI for a very, very long time. In biology, there was this problem of protein folding, which is an extremely difficult problem to solve. And the company DeepMind came up with a solution called AlphaFold that, it doesn't solve the problem completely, but it provides, a bit of hope that this is a problem that can be tackled with AI. And that's absolutely amazing. This is a problem that for the 50 years, we were like, oh my God, what should we do with this? But all of a sudden, there is an opportunity that we might actually be able to solve it. So seeing examples like that used in sciences really gets me excited, and I hope for the best going forward.
Nice example, Amir. You took that one. I think on a more widely known, I was surprised. I was listening to this podcast to Dmitry Dolgov, who's the CTO of Waymo. I was surprised to find out that they're essentially running two full-scale pilots in Arizona, where they're now dealing with problems like SLAs, and people are kind of used to the taxi, driverless taxis, and just they're being pissed at oh, you didn't take me to the right side of the mall, right? They don't after a week they don't even care that there's no driver. They just want the good service, right? So I think that was pretty cool. And it doesn't get as much hype as Tesla does with all the full self-driving or whatever. But on the more technical side, I was really amazed by the the Facebook paper that came out on the was it Facebook on the multimodal transformers, and also the essentially audio to audio without skipping to text. You have a raw input as audio or video, and then you're able to essentially train on that data without having to convert that to text. So I think that's going to be really interesting. Moving NLP successes outside of text is going to be really fun, I think. So
the reason why I asked this question is that I think that when I ask this question, I find what people find to be magical in it, because this has such a powerful way of surprising you with just how amazing it is. If you look under the covers, you just look on the surface. So the news that you're hearing about self-driving cars, that's a simple Google away. You don't have to find a subject matter expert to tell you this is how good it is, and it's incredible. And the protein folding thing was, a magical advancement in essentially biomedicine. We're going to do some amazing stuff with this. On my side, I love music, and I love just how good AI music has gotten, and it blows my mind. It blows my mind just to listen to this stuff and be like, because I generate it, but no one's ever heard this song before, and I really like this band, being AI, and I'm like, this is incredible. Then in a couple of years, I'm just going to be turned inside out. But if I just kind of summarize our conversation, that I think it's been really, really good. We going backwards, I really liked your point about engineering disciplines and how the evolution of that will help us build more reliable products and better products long term. then we went back a little bit farther, and I think it was really, really good that you shared the recipe and you showed, Amir, you showed, these are the high level ideas in de-risking your AI opportunity. The discovery, short-term validation, long-term validation that not only speak to the future landmines, which are more on the long-range side, but like it's also like this is how you identify problems worth solving, and these are the kinds of ways to think about solving them. I liked as well, your conversational point around the unicorn person who is very, very deep and understands the whole thing versus the functional specification or specialization, pardon me, that likely comes when the organization scales up its AI activity. But I think that that's an interesting idea as well. And then I also liked when we went back to the beginning, which was, both of you had really good insights into, what is contributing to the failure rate and what is contributing to the need for these validation steps to build good products. So I'd like to thank you for that.
I think there's a question.
Yeah, there's a question from the audience here, and I'll read it out, and then I'll see who is the best suited to answer this one. So what is the role of synthetic data in your applications, and are your teams interested in investing in building a resources to develop more synthetic data closer to the real world? So it sounds like this is about our application of synthetic data, and is this something that's worth investing in?
I'll give it a try. So there is, I guess Yerzat briefly spoke about the importance of data in a lot of applications that we build. And it's funny that question is very timely because Andrew Ng, that we all know, recently has started talking about this whole data-centric machine learning thing that you probably have heard of. If not, search that Andrew Ng data-centric machine learning, you will see a bunch of videos about it. So the purpose of that whole argument is that we are developing models that are increasingly complex. That requires much bigger computational power to handle. So what if we kept the complexity of these models constant and instead invested our time in making better data go into these models, right? So that could save us a lot of time, give us much better performances, et cetera, et cetera. So he's running this competition where the model is fixed and you're just playing with the data to get better performance, which is amazing. Like it is something that everybody should have thought about, but it is amazing that we have to talk about it now. And one of the ways that you can make your data better is to augment it. So data usually doesn't come with the diversity that you need. Like it has biases. It doesn't necessarily have all the aspects that you want, you need for your training. And sometimes it is just, too small and doesn't cover the whole distribution of the population that you're interested to model using your machine learning model. And synthetic data is, for some examples, is a very, very powerful way to provide that extra data that you need to diversify your data set and be able to train models that are fixed or maybe changing, but still, get significantly better performances. So it is definitely a very, very interesting upcoming topic. I think in the next few years we'll hear a lot more about it. But yeah, 100%, it is something on the rise for sure.
If I may add, for sure, I agree 100% with Amir on everything that he said. I think as usual, there's a lot of kind of demand and interest, and especially on the data science teams, because everybody follows, the latest trends, and everybody knows, like, it's not a secret, right? Like, it's great that Andrew Ng has finally caught up to this, but it was always not a secret that data is dirty or it's small. So I actually have a real example where, people really wanted to do this, right? Like, we wanted to do synthetic data generation. We wanted to do fake data, right? But what we ran into is it's very hard, as Amir mentioned, outside of a few examples or use cases to do it. So, for example, time series data, I don't know, claims, right? Like fraudulent claims, for example. With so few examples already, generating a synthetic data set, it's you really need to sit down and think about it really hard, right? Or there's actually startups that spring up around this, that are just dedicated to doing this thing. But in a usual scenario where you have, your your projects and initiatives, and you really want to push things out the door. Unfortunately, there might not be enough time to sit down and try to generate fake data. And then you have to really think about, like, is this fake data or synthetic data going to be the same distribution? Is it going to meet the end? And is it going to be useful at the end of the day, right? And it's a very interesting conundrum. A lot of people on the inside of the teams, on the DS teams, they really want to do this, and they really want to spend time researching this. Just unfortunately, right now, it's really hard to justify the time spent from a business perspective. But I think as an applied research initiative, it's a really good direction. Yeah.
And I think it builds on what the person who was asking the question is saying here, right? Which is like, it does sound that there is appetite for investment in this area, because let's be honest, like Yerzat, if you could have found a company that would have done it more cost effectively, you saw the value in it. It was like, oh, like, yeah, that would be really worth doing, but we're going to try and do it ourselves. So there may be some reference data sets in self-driving cars or something like that. Let's just pretend that there was an opportunity for a bunch of self-driving car startups. They may all want to see the reference data set. I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a real thing, where we've seen it with ImageNet. We've seen it with a lot of like the standard benchmarks for modeling, that they're all using the same data set, and it's because they're essentially competing with each other. Yeah. But it wouldn't surprise me if in a little while we've realized that not only is this a fair representation of the audience, it's a fair kind of cut at this problem, that everybody's going to be now competing on building a better model. So it actually takes the other side of the problem. And I kind of wanted to argue a bit of a counterpoint to what Andrew is saying, like, which is, yeah, I agree that the data is probably your highest leverage point. I also think that in a little while, once we've started realizing that the data was so important that we needed to do it right for a while, that what you may want to do is you want to have a reference data set, or have your data in a good shape that you can try a whole bunch of things on it and parallelize that. So instead of trying one thing and then another thing and then another thing, no, like AutoML kind of thing. All the models, all the parameters, and just see which one kind of pulls out. In which case you may want not only that reference data set, and then maybe you had some custom features that your company is developing that can add on to it and do what you were saying earlier about transfer learning. But I mean, like, it means as well that you start identifying the right way to solve a problem much quicker. So I wonder if this might be a very fruitful topic in the next little while. I don't think it changes that the data is of paramount importance. The model is very important as well. But I want to kind of come back to where we started, right? Which is, those are fundamental, but you got to make sure you have a good problem to solve, and then you validate it, and that you end up with building a product that is actually valuable. So with that, we're pretty much at the end here. So thank you very, 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 very much, Amir. And thank you very, very, very much, Yerzat. It was really, really great conversation. And thank you to everybody in the audience. It has been a really great time, and hopefully you got something from it. And connect with us on LinkedIn, or feel free to reach out. I'm gonna extend that invite on behalf of Yerzat and Amir, but definitely, feel free to reach out if you'd like to talk more about this. It's a conversation we'd like to have. So thank you very, very, very much, and looking forward to seeing you again. I don't know, sometime soon. Cheers.
Thank you.